My name is Princess Samira bint Faisal Al Hadi. I was born behind gold-plated gates in Riyadh, in a palace with marble floors from Italy and silk curtains from Paris. But from the very beginning, my life was not my own. The world saw privilege, power, and endless wealth. Inside those walls, I learned something very different, that as a Saudi royal daughter, my value was measured by obedience, silence, and the way I protected my family's honor. By the time I could hold a spoon, a maid was already folding a tiny black abaya over my shoulders. At 3 years old, I was kneeling on a prayer rug for Fajr, repeating Arabic verses I did not yet understand, only knowing that if I stumbled over a word, my tutor's eyebrow would twitch and my mother's eyes would fill with fear. At 6, I could serve coffee to visiting princes without spilling a single drop, always with my gaze lowered, never meeting a man's eyes. My father, Prince Faisal, ruled our home like a small kingdom. When he entered a room, conversations died. My mother, a princess herself, floated one step behind him like a shadow, beautiful, silent, and untouchable. I watched her, thinking this was what womanhood meant, to agree, to endure, to disappear.
But there was one place in the palace where I could breathe, the nursery on the east wing, where my younger brother Omar slept in a carved wooden crib decorated with hand-painted stars. As he grew, that room became our universe. While the rest of the palace moved in rigid lines and whispered rules, Omar and I built castles from pillows, turned carpets into oceans, and imagined that the world beyond our walls was full of color and laughter. Outside our games, life was strict. My day was divided into prayers, Quran recitation, lessons in royal etiquette, and endless reminders that my body, my voice, my future did not belong to me. I was told that Allah was pleased with girls who were quiet, modest, and submissive. Fathers were pleased with daughters who did not ask questions. So I buried my questions deep inside. When I was 10, my father invited scholars and ministers to a private dinner. I was ordered to recite long passages of the Quran in front of them. I remember standing there, my voice echoing between crystal chandeliers and walls covered in gold calligraphy, feeling less like a daughter and more like a trophy. They praised my memory, my piety, my discipline. No one asked what I believed. No one asked if I was happy. From the outside, my life looked perfect. I had designer dresses, servants who dressed me, guards who watched over me, drivers who took me to private schools and back. But I was never allowed to walk down an ordinary street, to enter a grocery store, to sit in a cafe, and taste life like other girls. I lived in a golden prison, and I did not yet know that it was a prison. Ask yourself this. If you grow up in a cage made of diamonds, how long does it take before you realize the bars are still bars? For me, that realization came much later, on the day my father told me that the same little boy who once shared my toys would soon become my husband. Until then, I thought the worst thing that could happen to a royal daughter was being married to a stranger. I had no idea that my nightmare would be far worse, and that Jesus would step into it. Before he became part of my deepest trauma, Omar was my favorite person in the world. He was born 2 years after me, a delicate baby with big dark eyes and a quiet curiosity that made the nannies adore him. Where other royal boys grew loud and demanding, Omar watched and listened. When we were children, he would follow me around the palace gardens, holding my hand as if I were his guide through a world too bright and too big. We were raised in the same strict system, but treated very differently. From the moment he could walk, everyone reminded him that he was a prince, an heir, a future decision-maker. From the moment I could walk, everyone reminded me that I was a daughter, a future wife, a carrier of family honor. Yet, in our early years, Omar often stepped out of his role. At 8, when I accidentally spilled hot tea on an antique table, my father's face turned to stone. Before he could speak, Omar stepped forward and said it was his fault that he had bumped into me. He was punished. I was spared. That night, I whispered, "Why did you do that?" He just shrugged and said, "You're my sister. I protect you." End quote. We would sneak to the rooftop at night, when the desert wind cooled the air and the city lights shimmered like a second sky. Omar had a small telescope, a gift from a visiting European diplomat. He would point out constellations and tell me how the Prophet Ibrahim looked at the stars and realized there was only one true God. We would whisper dreams we could never say aloud in daylight. I told him I wished I could study medicine and travel the world helping children. He told me he wished he could choose his own life without 100 eyes watching every step. As we approached our teenage years, things shifted subtly at first. The line between boy and girl hardened. Suddenly, the same relatives who used to smile at our closeness began to frown. Doors that were once open quietly closed. "You're becoming a woman now," my mother told me gently, placing a black abaya on my bed. "You must be more careful. People talk." Omar started spending more time with our father, with religious scholars and political advisors. I saw him less on the rooftop, more in the men's majlis, his posture changing, his confidence growing. Yet he still slipped into the garden sometimes, still asked me what I was reading, still smuggled me novels from abroad wrapped inside my Quran study books. He was my first friend, my only confidant, the one who whispered, "You are smarter than they know," when I doubted myself. So when his gaze later changed, when the softness in his eyes hardened into something possessive and dark, it broke me in a way no stranger ever could have. That is what made my story so twisted. The boy who once hid my mistakes would later stand beside my father as they announced that I would belong to him, not as a sister, but as a wife. The betrayal did not come from enemies outside our palace. It came from the same hand that once reached for mine on the rooftop under the stars. I still remember the sound of my father's voice that day, flat, official, unmistakable. I was 21. The afternoon air in Riyadh was heavy and hot, even inside the palace, where air conditioners hummed like insects behind the walls. A servant knocked on my door with eyes that refused to meet mine. His study was the room everyone respected and feared. Ancient swords hung on the walls, and the smell of oud and leather filled the air. My father sat behind his enormous desk, our family crest carved into the wood. Omar stood slightly behind him, hands folded, eyes lowered. I thought I was there to be praised for my Quran recitation or to be informed of some official event. Instead, my father looked up, his face unreadable, and said, "Samira, it is decided. You will marry your brother Omar in 6 months' time. The engagement will be announced at the next family gathering." For a full heartbeat, I could not process the words. My mind scrambled, searching for another meaning, another Omar, another context. But there was none. The room tilted slightly. My hands went cold. "Baba," I whispered. "He is my brother." My father's gaze sharpened. "He is also a prince of Al-Hadi. This marriage will preserve our bloodline and strengthen our position. Many royal families have done the same. It is a sacrifice for the sake of our name and our honor. Allah will bless it." I turned to Omar, desperate for him to laugh, to say this was a joke, a misunderstanding. Instead, I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach twist, a mixture of triumph, hunger, and something like relief. He did not look shocked. He did not protest. This was not happening to him. It was happening for him. "Baba, Islam forbids this," I stammered, my voice shaking. "We are taught—" My father's voice cut through mine like a knife. "Do not teach me religion in my own house. I have consulted scholars more learned than you. They have given their opinion. Our situation is unique. Your duty is to obey." He spoke of honor, of enemies, of Western corruption, and the need to keep our line pure. He mentioned other royal families who married cousins, and hinted at older, darker precedents no one dared speak out loud. Every sentence pushed the air out of my lungs. Fear pounded in my chest, but another feeling slipped in beneath it. Betrayal, not only from my father, but from God, as I understood him. I had memorized long chapters of the Quran. I had fasted, prayed, obeyed, sacrificed. I thought devotion meant protection. Now the very religion and culture I trusted were being used to chain me to something that violated the deepest part of my being. When I tried to argue, my father's expression hardened. "If you resist, you will bring shame on all of us," he said quietly. "We can send you away. We can claim you are mentally unstable. We can do much worse. Do not push me to protect our honor." Who do you run to when the man who is supposed to protect you becomes your captor? When the brother who once shielded you stands there, silent, while your future is signed away? That evening, as servants measured me for engagement gowns, and my mother avoided my eyes, I realized a painful truth. In this house, my feelings were irrelevant. My body was a contract. My will was an inconvenience. My faith, as I had known it, had become a weapon pointed at my own heart. After the announcement, the palace changed, but only for me. On the surface, life went on. Meetings were held, meals served, carpets vacuumed, and guests welcomed. But inside my chest, something cracked. I moved through corridors I had known all my life and felt like a stranger in my own home. My mother came to my room that night. She sat on the edge of my bed and smoothed the fabric of my abaya in small, nervous circles. When I broke down, begging her to intervene, she squeezed her eyes shut. "Habibti, you do not understand how this world works," she whispered. "Your father carries the weight of this family on his shoulders. He does what he believes is best. Allah will reward your obedience. He will punish your rebellion." "Even if it feels wrong?" I asked, voice hoarse. "Even if it is against everything in my heart?" Her fingers tightened. "Our hearts can deceive us. Obedience does not always feel good. It is still obedience." Those words drilled into me like poison. My mother was not cruel. She was trapped too shaped by the same system, bound by the same fear. But, knowingly or not, she became part of the machinery that pressed me into silence. The religious scholars father summoned were worse. When I, carefully and respectfully, asked them for clarification, they answered with long monologues, stitching together unusual interpretations, obscure historical anecdotes, and warnings about Western corruption. They spoke of family purity, divine wisdom, and exceptions for the sake of greater good. They dismissed my discomfort as weakness, my questions as arrogance. "Do you think you know better than your father?" one of them asked coldly. "Do you think you know better than the scholars?" In those moments, I discovered something devastating. In our system, God's name could be attached to almost anything if powerful men agreed to it. The God I had feared and served became a distant, stern figure always standing behind my father, nodding approval at whatever he decided. And my brother? He became my shadow. He started escorting me to lessons, sitting in on conversations, protecting me from influences he called un-Islamic. He would correct my posture, my tone, my clothing, as if rehearsing for the day when he would be both husband and controller. The engagement ceremony was scheduled for 1 month later. The palace came alive with preparations. Florists, jewelers, tailors, chefs. I watched it all with a hollow numbness. I was being celebrated as if I were the guest of honor at my own funeral. Ask yourself this: what happens to a soul that is told, "God wants this," when everything in that soul is screaming, "This is wrong"? Some break, some grow hard. Mine began to do something dangerous. It began to question whether the God I had been shown was truly God at all. Those questions terrified me more than the forced marriage, because doubt was treated as a greater crime than suffering. You could be beaten, locked away, even killed for dishonoring your family. But to doubt the religious system that justified it, that was to risk your eternity. So I did what I had been trained to do. I prayed. I fasted. I cried into my pillow until it was wet with tears. I begged Allah to change my father's mind, to change Omar's heart, to send some miracle that would free me. What I did not expect was that the first answer would come from someone I had only ever heard described as a prophet for someone else's religion. His name was Jesus. In the months between the engagement and the planned wedding, I lived in a private war. Every night, when the palace fell quiet and footsteps faded, I rolled out my prayer rug and pressed my forehead so hard into the fabric that my skin burned. I recited surahs I had known since childhood, reminding Allah of His mercy, His justice, His power to rescue. My words spilled out in Arabic, but underneath them, the language was raw and simple. Help me, please. I cannot do this. At first, prayer brought the same familiar numbness I had always associated with obedience, a dull, muted peace that felt more like surrender than comfort. But as the wedding day approached, something in me snapped. One night, instead of reciting memorized verses, I broke every rule I had been taught and spoke from my heart. "Why?" I whispered into the rug. "Why is my suffering acceptable? Why do you seem to care more about my father's honor than my soul? Why does my brother's desire carry more weight than my fear?" The questions frightened me as soon as they left my lips. I had always been told that to question Allah was to invite His wrath. But once they started, they would not stop. If you are just, how can you bless this? If you are merciful, why are you silent? Night after night, the prayers turned into silent screams. I started waking up with headaches, my eyes swollen, my body shaking. The servants assumed I was stressed about the wedding. No one imagined I was in a spiritual crisis. In secret, I began to search. Our palace library was vast, filled with religious texts, law books, and carefully censored history. I read about Islamic jurisprudence, marriage laws, and the many ways scholars had justified what powerful men wanted. The more I read, the more confused I became. The rules seemed flexible when it benefited the right people, and rigid when it controlled the wrong ones, usually women. One night, overwhelmed and exhausted, I collapsed onto my bed without finishing my prayers. Sometime before dawn, I slipped into a dream so vivid it felt more real than my waking life. I stood in a place that was not the palace. The ground was white, like marble, but warm under my bare feet. Light seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, soft, gentle, and yet so bright that there were no shadows. In front of me stood a man dressed in pure white robes, his face radiant and kind. He looked at me as if he had known me forever. There was no fear in me, only a strange, unfamiliar sense of being completely seen. He spoke in flawless classical Arabic, more beautiful than any recitation I had ever heard. "My daughter," he said, and something inside me broke open at the tenderness in his voice. "I have heard your cries." I woke up with tears streaming down my face. My pillow was wet, my heart pounding, my room still dark. I tried to dismiss it as a dream, a figment of my desperate mind. But the peace I felt lingered, a quiet warmth in my chest I had never known before. The following week it happened again, then again. Each dream was different. Sometimes I was standing beside water, sometimes walking through a garden, but the same man appeared, always in white, always with that mixture of authority and love. He called me daughter, spoke of freedom and dignity, and hinted that my story was not over. I did not yet know his name. I only knew that when I poured out my pain to Allah, the silence in response had become unbearable, and into that silence, someone else was starting to speak. As the dreams continued, they began to form a pattern. In one, I stood in my wedding dress, alone in an empty hall. The chairs were there, the flowers, the chandeliers, but no guests. The man in white appeared beside me and gently took the veil from my face. "This is not the marriage I have for you," he said. His words carried weight, as if they had the power to rearrange reality itself. In another dream, I was a child again, sitting on the palace rooftop with Omar's old telescope. I tried to look at the stars, but the lens was cracked. When I lifted my head, the man in white was seated beside me, looking straight up at the sky. "You have been taught to see God through broken glass," he said softly. "Let me show you clearly." The dreams left me shaken but strangely comforted. Still, they terrified me. I had been warned since childhood about false visions, about Shaitan disguising himself to lead believers astray. Part of me wondered if that was what was happening. if I was being tested or tempted. Another part of me, deeper and more honest, recognized something in those encounters. A love so pure, so patient, so gentle, that it did not feel like manipulation or control. It felt holy. One night, in the 3rd month after the engagement, the dream came that changed everything. I found myself in a place that looked like a simple Middle Eastern street at dusk. The sky glowed orange, and the air smelled of dust and spices. People passed by, faces blurred. I stood there, clutching the edges of my abaya, feeling small and lost. Then I sensed him before I saw him. The atmosphere shifted like a stillness after a storm. The man in white walked toward me, his eyes filled with a kindness that made my knees weak. This time, I spoke first. "Who are you?" My voice trembled. "Why are you coming to me?" He smiled, and it felt like the sun breaking through clouds. "I am the one who sees you in your room when you think you are alone. I am the one who hears every tear you do not dare to speak out loud." "Are you Allah?" I asked, desperate and confused. "I am the Word of God," he answered. "The one your book calls Isa, the Messiah. I am Jesus." My mind rebelled. Jesus, the prophet of the Christians, the one we respected but never followed, the one about whom we were told that Christians lied, calling him the Son of God? I took a step back. "That cannot be," I whispered. "I am Muslim. I belong to Islam. I cannot follow you." His expression did not change. There was no anger, only steady love. "You belong to me because I made you," he said. "Your pain is not invisible to me. The prison they built around you does not reach my throne. I came to set captives free. And yes, that means you." I woke up gasping, my heart racing. The dawn prayer call echoed faintly through the city, a sound I had always found comforting. That morning, it felt like a question. I tried to push the dream away. I performed my ablutions, laid out my prayer rug, and began my usual recitations. But the words felt heavy, like stones falling from my mouth. In the back of my mind, another phrase pulsed quietly. I came to set captives free. Who was this Jesus really? Was he a prophet? Just one more among many? Or something more? Something my world had carefully hidden from me? That day, for the first time in my life, I sat down at the palace computer, opened a private browser window, and typed a forbidden word, Christianity. The palace internet was monitored, but not perfectly. In certain hours, when the IT staff changed shifts and the house grew quiet, there were small gaps moments when no one was paying much attention to what one princess in her private room might be reading. I began to live for those gaps. My hands shook the first time I opened an English Bible website, then quickly switched to an Arabic translation. I expected to feel something dark, something obviously wrong, the way I had always been told. Instead, I found myself staring at words that felt strangely familiar and yet entirely new. I read about Jesus touching lepers no one else would touch, about him speaking to women as equals, defending them from religious men who wanted to stone them. I read him saying, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I read about a God who does not demand that people climb up to him through rituals and performance, but who comes down to them, entering their pain and shame. I compared it with what I had known, a system where my worth depended on obedience, where men spoke for God and women listened, where honor mattered more than healing. I thought of my father using God's name to justify my marriage to my brother. I thought of scholars bending verses to fit his will. The contrast cut me open. Of course, I also found arguments against Christianity Islamic websites, warning that the Bible was corrupted, that the Trinity was blasphemy, that the cross was a lie. I read those too, trying to be fair, trying not to be deceived. But each time I put the Christian texts away, the dreams returned, and that same gentle presence whispered, "Look at me, not just at what they say about me." Ask yourself this. Have you ever been so desperate that you were willing to question everything you had been told was sacred? That is where I was. I stopped caring about what label people might put on me. Muslim, Christian, apostate, traitor. I cared about one thing, truth. If the God I had served truly approved of my forced marriage, then I had to ask if I wanted that God. If the Jesus I was encountering in my dreams truly saw me as a daughter instead of a bargaining chip, then I had to ask why I had never been told about him honestly. I began to pray differently. Instead of reciting memorized du'as, I sat on the floor and spoke plainly into the darkness. God, whoever you really are, show me. If you are Allah as I've been taught, show me. If you are Jesus as I'm starting to see, show me. I don't want comfort. I want truth, even if it destroys my entire life. That is a dangerous prayer. Because when you ask the real God to reveal himself, he does not tend to respect the fragile structures built around his name. He goes straight for the chains. While my inner world was collapsing and rebuilding itself, the outer world rushed toward celebration. The engagement ceremony arrived like a storm. Tailors draped me in gowns heavy with crystals. Makeup artists erased the exhaustion from my face and painted on a version of me that looked radiant and calm. Servants carried in trays of sweets and coffee. The palace ballroom glittered. My family called it a joyous day. I called it a public humiliation. Relatives from across the kingdom arrived, their perfume and jewels filling the air. They kissed my cheeks and congratulated me, some whispering, "What a blessed union. Your father is so wise." Not one asked if I wanted it. Not one acknowledged the horror of a sister marrying her younger brother. As the official moment approached, I stood beside Omar, in front of hundreds of people. A cleric recited verses about marriage. My father gave a speech about honor, tradition, and strength. Then Omar took my hand, my little brother's hand, now slightly larger than mine, and slid an enormous diamond ring onto my finger. Applause rose like a wave, crashing over me. Inside, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even shock. Just a deep, hollow ache. A numbness that felt like death creeping in quietly. Across the room, I caught sight of a mirror. For 1 second, I saw myself through eyes that were not mine. A young woman in a green silk gown, a diamond tiara catching the light, a smile carefully painted onto her lips. She looked like every storybook princess some little girl might dream of becoming. If only they knew that she was about to be given to her own brother like a gift passed between men. Later that night, after the guests left and the music faded, I shut my bedroom door and sank to the floor. I pressed my back against the wood, as if someone might still come in and drag me out. Jesus, I whispered into the silence, the word tasting dangerous and holy on my tongue. If you are real, if you are who you say you are in my dreams, I need you to do more than comfort me. I need you to act. I need you to save me. I expected nothing. Instead, I felt something I could not explain, a warmth, like invisible arms wrapping around me. Not romantic, not possessive, protective, steady. I will. A quiet thought seemed to answer in my chest, not from my own mind. Trust me. The path will be costly, but I will not leave you alone. I did not understand yet that salvation sometimes begins not with escape, but with the courage to see clearly. That night, for the first time, I stopped calling what was happening to me Allah's will and started calling it by its real name. In the weeks after the engagement, the dreams intensified. Sometimes they came in the early hours before Fajr, sometimes in the middle of the day when I closed my eyes out of sheer exhaustion. Always the same man, always the same unshakable sense of being known and loved. He began to show me scenes that felt symbolic. In one, I stood in a room full of locked doors. My father, my brother, the scholars, all of them appeared, each placing heavier locks onto the doors and warning me that if I tried to open them, I would be cursed. After they left, I sank to the floor in despair. Then Jesus entered the room, without using any door at all. He simply appeared, looked at me with compassion, and said, "They cannot lock me out." The locks fell off one by one. In another, I saw myself in a black abaya so heavy I could barely stand. It was covered in chains made of words: shame, honor, obedience, fear. Jesus walked up, touched each chain, and as he spoke a single word, mine, they snapped and dropped to the ground. I woke up one morning with a simple question burning inside me. What if everything I have been taught about God is only part of the story? What if the part they hid from me is the part that can save me? Around that time, small physical signs began to appear. A nurse from Lebanon, temporarily hired to care for an elderly aunt, slipped into my room after checking the older woman's blood pressure. She looked around carefully and then pressed a tiny folded paper into my hand. "Read this when you are alone," she whispered. It was a verse from the Injil, the New Testament, written in delicate Arabic. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. No explanation, no signature, just that. Another day, a malfunction in the Palace Library catalogue placed a Christian book in the Islamic Studies section I often used. It was about Muslim women who had encountered Jesus. I checked the security cameras later, expecting to see some human mistake. The footage froze precisely at the moment the book should have been placed. No one could explain it. Were these coincidences? Maybe. Or maybe they were the subtle fingerprints of a God who was beginning to pull back a curtain. I started whispering his name under my breath when no one could hear. Yeshua, Jesus. The first few times, I felt sure lightning would strike me. Instead, I felt peace. It was as if my soul had been waiting for that name, like a thirsty desert waiting for rain. Have you ever spoken a word that felt like a key? The closer we came to the wedding date, the more the palace looked like a palace again, and the more my heart felt like a graveyard. Designers were flown in from Europe. They sketched gowns and veils and tiaras, speaking about fairy tale aesthetics and timeless elegance. No one noticed that the bride sat like stone while they pinned lace at her shoulders. My wedding dress cost more than most people will see in their lifetime. White silk imported from France, hand-stitched pearls, subtle gold embroidery woven with verses about blessing and union. When they first put it on me, everyone gasped at how perfect it looked. I stared at myself in the mirror and thought, this is what a burial shroud looks like when you are rich. There is a particular kind of madness that comes when everyone around you insists something is wonderful, while every cell in your body is screaming that it is wrong. You begin to question your own sanity. Maybe it is not that bad. Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe God really does want this. In those moments, the only thing that kept me from collapsing under the pressure was the memory of that quiet voice in my dreams, saying, "This is not the marriage I have for you." The night before the wedding, they placed the dress on a mannequin in my room, as if it were a guest sleeping beside me. I lay awake staring at it, feeling my heartbeat echo in my ears. I thought of running, of jumping from the balcony, of swallowing every pill in the medicine cabinet. Not because I hated life, but because I could not imagine living the life they were forcing on me. Around midnight, I slid off the bed and onto my knees, but this time I did not reach for my prayer rug. I sat on the cool marble floor, wrapped my arms around myself, and whispered one sentence into the darkness. Jesus, if you are who you say you are, this is your last chance. Either save me or let me die. No careful words, no ritual, just desperation. Nothing dramatic happened in that moment. No thunder, no visions. The air in the room did not change. The dress still gleamed in the corner like a silent threat. But inside, something shifted. A strange, steady calm settled over me. Not the numbness I had been living in, but a focused, almost sharp clarity. I did not know how. But I knew this. The story would not end the way my father planned. That certainty did not come from optimism or denial. It felt like a promise whispered from somewhere beyond the ceiling, beyond the sky. The morning of the wedding dawned impossibly bright. Sunlight streamed through the palace windows as if the universe were mocking me. Servants fluttered around my room, their chatter full of excitement. They washed my hair, applied my makeup, zipped me into the dress that made me feel like a beautifully decorated prisoner. As they placed the heavy diamond tiara on my head, I felt like a sacrifice being prepared for an altar built to honor family, culture, and a distorted image of God. The ceremony was held in the grand hall, transformed into a scene from a movie. White roses cascaded from the ceiling, gold chairs lined the aisle. An orchestra played soft music while guests laughed, unaware that the bride felt like she was walking to her execution. When the doors opened and I stepped in, hundreds of eyes turned to me. Phones rose to take pictures. Whispered compliments floated around the room. They saw a princess. I felt like a corpse. At the front, Omar waited in traditional attire. His expression caught somewhere between pride and possession. Beside him stood a high-ranking cleric, ready to sanctify what heaven wanted to stop. As I walked down the aisle, I did something small but significant. Silently, in my heart, I repeated one name with every step. Jesus! 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 When we reached the front, the cleric began the ceremony. He spoke of duty, honor, obedience. He praised our Father's wisdom. He cited obscure rulings that no one in that room would ever use for themselves, but that they gladly accepted when it preserved their world. Then came the vows. My lips moved automatically, reciting words I had been trained to say, words about obedience, submission, and accepting Omar as my husband. Each sentence felt like a knife cutting through my soul. At the exact moment when I thought, "This is it, it's over," something happened. No one else saw it. No one else felt it. But to me, it was as real as the ring slipping onto my finger. A presence wrapped around me, strong, steady, and overwhelming in its gentleness. It felt like someone standing right beside me, closer than any human could stand. My lungs filled easily for the first time in weeks. My hands stopped shaking. A warmth spread through my chest. In the middle of the cleric's recitation, while everyone's eyes were on me, I heard a voice not with my ears, but inside, in the place where fear had been living. "My daughter," it said, the same voice from my dreams, "you are not alone. I have heard you. Trust me. This is not the end of your story." A peace settled over me so suddenly that my expression changed. People later said they thought I looked radiant in that moment, as if I had finally accepted my fate. They had no idea that what they were seeing was not surrender to their plan, but surrender to someone far greater. By the time the ceremony ended, I was legally and religiously bound to my younger brother. Heaven said, beginning. After the reception, the palace emptied slowly. Guests left, music faded, and the cleaners moved silently through the hall, like ghosts removing the evidence of a crime. I was escorted to the bridal suite, lavishly decorated, full of flowers and candles. It felt like a stage built for a scene I refused to imagine. My heart pounded, not from anticipation but from dread so heavy I could barely stand. Servants fussed over my hair, my veil, my jewelry. In another part of the palace, Omar was preparing too. I remember looking around and thinking, this is the room where I either lose myself completely or something breaks so violently that nothing can ever be the same. This is the Lenge Gesvai. I did the only thing I knew to do. I knelt not in the direction of the Qibla, not on a prayer rug, but right there on the carpet. My wedding dress pooled around me. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Jesus, I am yours now. If you want to save me, save me. If not, give me the strength to survive whatever is coming." Minutes passed. Or hours. I do not know. What I do know is that the door never opened. Later, I would learn what happened in those same moments on the other side of the palace. Just as Omar was about to leave his room, he collapsed. A sudden, violent illness hit him, fever spiking, body shaking, stomach convulsing. He could not stand. He could not walk. He began vomiting uncontrollably. Doctors were summoned in panic. Nurses rushed through hallways. The palace descended into chaos. In the bridal suite, no one had told me yet. I sat there in silence, listening for footsteps that never came. Slowly, a realization dawned not from information, but from that same quiet place inside where I had heard the voice at the ceremony. "He will not touch you," the thought came, clear and steady. "Not tonight. Not ever. I am intervening." Hours later, My mother burst into the room, her face pale and tight. "Omar is sick," she said. "Very sick. The doctors do not know what is wrong. The consummation will have to wait." I nodded, hiding the storm inside me. Was it coincidence? Food poisoning? Stress? The doctors said it was acute viral gastroenteritis. Then they changed their minds. Test after test came back normal. No infection, no clear cause. Yet Omar remained bedridden, unable to keep food down, his strength draining. Each time someone suggested that we honor the marriage once he felt a little better, his body reacted violently, vomiting, fever spikes, disorientation. It was as if his own flesh refused to cooperate. My family began to whisper that perhaps Allah was displeased. Some blamed me, claiming my reluctance had attracted a curse. Others blamed enemies, imagining witchcraft or jealousy. I knew better. That night, alone in my room, I fell to my knees again, not in desperation this time, but in awe. "You did this," I whispered. "You actually did this." I felt no triumph over Omar's suffering, only a deep, trembling gratitude that my first prayer for salvation had been answered, not with an escape I could have planned, but with an interruption no one could deny. This was not the full rescue yet. I was still in the palace, still legally bound, still watched, but something irreversible had happened. The wedding night that was supposed to seal my captivity had been the first visible crack in the prison wall. Jesus had placed his hand on the story and said, "No, Omar's illness changed everything, and yet, on the surface, nothing." He lay in bed, drifting between pain and restless sleep, surrounded by the best doctors money could buy. They scanned, tested, speculated. They prescribed medicines that did nothing. They whispered in hallways about stress, autoimmune reactions, rare syndromes. No one could explain why a healthy young man had suddenly broken like glass. In a culture where people are quick to attach spiritual meaning to unexplained events, rumors spread. Some said Allah was punishing our family. Others said someone had cursed us. No one dared say aloud what a few were thinking. Maybe forcing siblings to marry had consequences heaven could not ignore. While my relatives argued theology, something else was happening behind the scenes. One afternoon, as I sat in the garden under the shade of a palm tree, a woman in a nurse's uniform approached with a tray of tea for the older aunts. She was not Saudi, her features suggested, Palestine or Lebanon. Her badge read, Mariam. She served everyone, then circled back and placed a small folded napkin on the table in front of me. Our eyes met, just for a second. There was something in her gaze urgent, compassionate, fearless. Later, alone in my room, I unfolded the napkin. Written in Arabic, in elegant script, were words from the Bible. "If the sun sets you free, you will be free indeed." My heart hammered in my chest. I looked around my empty room as if cameras might emerge from the walls. Days later, Mariam approached me in the garden again, under the watchful eyes of guards who assumed she was just a nurse doing her job. She pretended to adjust my aunt's shawl, then whispered, almost without moving her lips, "We know about you. We are praying. You are not alone." I froze. "Who is we?" I managed to murmur. "Followers of Isa," she said softly. "Some in this city, some in other countries. Someone told us about your dreams, about your marriage. We have been asking Jesus to make a way of escape." Tears burned behind my eyes. I wanted to ask 100 questions. How did you know? Who told you? What are you planning? But the guard's eyes swept over us, and the moment was gone. Over the next weeks, through brief, risky interactions, Mariam revealed more. There was an underground network of Christians throughout the region, quiet, scattered, but deeply connected. They helped Muslims who had encountered Jesus and were in danger because of it. They arranged escapes, new identities, safe houses. It was not a fantasy. It was a dangerous reality. The question, she told me one evening, pretending to adjust the roses in a vase, is not whether Jesus can free you. He already has the power. The question is whether you are willing to leave everything behind when he opens the door. Everything behind. My title, my wealth, my family, my country, my entire life. Jesus had already answered my desperate prayer once by interrupting the consummation of my forced marriage. Now it seemed he was answering in a different way by presenting a choice that terrified me more than staying. Stay and live in gilded slavery, or leave and step into an unknown future with a God I was still just learning to trust. You may think you know what you would choose in such a moment. I thought I did too, until the day the escape plan finally came, and the cost became real. The plan unfolded like something from a film, but the fear was painfully real. Omar's condition refused to improve. After weeks of inconclusive tests, the doctors recommended treatment abroad. Specialists in Europe, they said. London, maybe Geneva. Somewhere with advanced diagnostic centers. My father resisted at first, pride wounded by the idea that Saudi medicine was not enough. But as Omar grew thinner and more fragile, desperation overruled pride. Arrangements were made: a private medical jet, a security team, a reservation at one of London's finest hospitals. To my relatives, this meant inconvenience. To the Christians in the shadows, it meant opportunity. Mariam slipped me a note with the basic outline. In London, security would be heavy, but more predictable. There would be one scheduled shopping trip for the princesses at a luxury department store. In that store, at a specific time, I would be separated from the main group for a fitting. A Christian contact would be waiting. New clothes, new documents, a car. From there, I would disappear into another life. If you say yes, her note ended, there is no halfway. You cannot change your mind later and return. Once you step through this door, it will close behind you. We will help. Jesus will be with you. But you must choose. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, counting the cost. If I stayed, my life would be strictly controlled, but materially comfortable. I would have servants, cars, jewelry, influence. I would also have a husband who was my brother, a father who saw me as property, and a God, at least as I had been taught, who seemed to bless my suffering as long as it preserved family honor. If I left, I would become a refugee, a former princess nobody recognized, walking the streets of a foreign country with nothing but the clothes on my back and a handful of contacts who owed me nothing. I would lose my inheritance. My father would disown me. Death threats would follow. I might never see my mother or sisters again. Jesus never promised me that it would be painless. In prayer, I sensed one message over and over. I can only fill hands that are empty. I can only lead feet that are willing to move. One night, on the balcony of my room, I looked up at the same stars I had studied with Omar as a child. I thought of my younger self, dreaming of helping people, of doing something meaningful with my life. What good is a life? I whispered, if it is lived in chains, no matter how beautiful they look. I realized that running away was not just about escaping my brother. It was about choosing whose voice would define me for the rest of my days. The voice of culture and fear, or the voice of the man in white who called me daughter. I went to bed that night with my heart racing and woke up with a strange, quiet certainty. In London, when the door opened, I would walk through it, not because I was brave, but because I finally believed what Jesus had been saying all along, that my life was worth more than my family's comfort, that my freedom mattered to God, and that He loved me enough to risk my entire world falling apart so He could rebuild it on truth. We arrived in London under heavy security. The cold air hit my face as I stepped off the plane, a shock after the desert heat. My abaya fluttered around my ankles as guards formed a protective circle around us. To onlookers, we were just another wealthy Middle Eastern family with armed escorts. No one knew that one of the women in that group was planning to disappear. The first 2 days passed in a blur of hospital corridors, consultations, and guarded car rides between the hotel and the clinic. I stayed mostly in the background, playing the role expected of me: concerned wife, obedient daughter, quiet, royal. Then the shopping trip came. It was framed as a way to cheer up the ladies while the men discussed medical options. A convoy of black cars dropped us at an exclusive department store. Security spread out discreetly, watching entrances and exits. Our family moved together like a small parade. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the saleswoman's questions. On the third floor, a staff member announced that a private fitting room was ready for me. "For your highness alone," she said with a practiced smile. My mother nodded approvingly. A guard followed me down the hallway, then took his position outside the door as I stepped in. My breath caught. Inside the fitting room, in place of a stylist, stood a woman in plain clothes with a calm, steady gaze. On the bench lay a set of Western clothes, jeans, a sweater, a coat, and a small handbag. "Princess Samira?" she asked softly. I hesitated. "Yes, my name is Ruth. This is your door." "You do not have much time." Outside, I could faintly hear my guard shifting his weight, assuming I was changing dresses. Ruth handed me the clothes. "In this bag, there is a passport with a new name, some cash, a phone, and an address. If you walk out that door and return to your family, we will understand. We will also have to disappear. If you walk through that other door," she nodded toward a second, almost invisible door at the back of the room, "there is a stairwell. I will walk with you for the first part. After that, Jesus will be enough." And very does be. My hands shook as I removed my abaya and dress, folding them neatly on the bench like the life I was leaving behind. I put on the jeans, the sweater, the coat. They felt strange and exposed, but also normal, like the clothing of millions of women who made their own choices every day. At the bottom of the bag, I found a small cross on a thin chain. I held it up. "Am I allowed to wear this?" I asked, half joking, half terrified. Ruth smiled. "You are allowed to be loved," she said. "That is what this is about." I slipped the cross into my pocket, not ready to put it on my neck yet, but unwilling to let it go. Ruth placed a hand on the second door's handle and looked at me. "Once I open this, everything changes." "Are you sure?" I thought of my mother's tired eyes, my father's hard face, Omar's feverish, confused stare, the palace, the mosque, the prayers, the dreams, and the man in white, whose voice had followed me from my room in Riyadh to this quiet fitting room in London. "I am not sure of anything," I admitted, "except that I cannot go back and pretend I do not know him." Ruth nodded. "Sometimes that is all the certainty you need." She pushed the door open. We stepped through. Behind us, the fitting room door remained closed, a silent witness to the moment a Saudi princess stopped belonging to her family and started belonging to the one who had been calling her name long before she knew it. The hours after my escape felt both fast and slow, like a dream and a drill at the same time. Ruth led me down a narrow stairwell, through a staff corridor, and out a service exit into a side street. The cold London air slapped my cheeks, clearing my head. For the first time, I walked on a public sidewalk, without guards, without an abaya, without anyone knowing my name. We got into a waiting car. The driver did not look back. No one said much. My mind raced with questions. Had my guard noticed yet? Were they checking the fitting room? Had my mother realized I was gone? Was my father furious? Everything I had known, my identity, my security, my future, was crumbling behind me. And yet, inside, a quiet voice kept whispering, "You are not falling. You are being carried." The car took me to a small flat in a neighborhood far from the luxury hotels my family stayed in. The walls were plain. The furniture was simple. The kitchen smelled faintly of spices and coffee. It was more ordinary than any place I had ever stood in. It felt holy. There, I met a small group of believers from different backgrounds. A former Muslim from Iran, a British woman raised in a Christian home, a Nigerian nurse, a Lebanese pastor's wife. They did not bow to me. They did not treat me like royalty. They hugged me. One of them, an older woman with kind eyes, put a hand on my shoulder. "We have prayed for you," she said. "You are safe here. For now." Safe was a word I was not used to applying to myself. Over the next days, they taught me how to do things I had never done alone: cook a simple meal, take a bus, use a phone without security filters. They also opened something else in front of me: a Bible, in my own language, without commentary filters or redacted passages. We read the Gospels together. I read Jesus' words, not as quotes from another religion, but as if he were speaking directly to me. Do not be afraid. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. I realized that in leaving my country, I had not just lost a life, I had found the possibility of a real one. Of course, fear did not disappear overnight. There were moments when news alerts on TV about Saudi diplomatic tensions made my stomach twist. I imagined my father issuing statements, my name being erased from family records, my face appearing on screens with the label traitor. Yet, when those waves of fear came, something stronger rose to meet them. The memory of Jesus standing beside me at the altar, his presence on the wedding night, his fingerprints all over my escape. Ask yourself this: if the God you were taught to fear shows himself to be kinder than any human you have ever known, how long can you keep running from him? One evening, as we sat around a small table, the Lebanese woman asked gently, "Samira, you have met Jesus in dreams. You have seen his hand in your life. Do you want to follow him, not just as a rescuer, but as your Lord?" The word Lord used to frighten me. It meant rule, authority, demands. But in his mouth, it meant something different: a leadership that never crushed, a love that never manipulated. My eyes filled with tears. "Yes," I said simply, "I do." We prayed, not in Arabic formulas, not facing a direction, just words, raw and honest. I told Jesus I believed he was who he said he was, that he had died and risen, that his blood washed away not only my sins, but my shame. I told him that the life I had left behind was his to judge. When I finished, I felt no thunder, no earthquake, just breath, deep, free, unhindered breath. For the first time in my life, I inhaled without the weight of fear on my chest. I exhaled without feeling like I owed the air to someone else. I did not know it then, but that simple prayer in a small London flat would mark the beginning of the rest of my story, the part where I learned the difference between being a princess by blood and a daughter by grace. Leaving Islam was not just leaving rituals. It was leaving a whole identity. In Riyadh, I had been Her Highness Princess Samira bint Faisal al-Hadi. My worth was tied to my last name, to my father's position, to the palace walls. Outside that world, I was just a young woman in borrowed clothes, with a refugee application and a passport bearing a name that was not yet mine in my heart. The Christian community that helped me escape understood this. They did not rush me. They answered my endless questions with patience. They let me mourn. Yes, mourn. I mourned the mother I might never hug again, the sisters whose weddings I might miss, the language of the call to prayer that had once comforted me. I mourned the little girl kneeling on a prayer rug, believing that if she tried hard enough, maybe God would be pleased. I mourned the parts of my culture that were beautiful hospitality, poetry, family warmth that had been used to hide what was ugly. In the middle of that grief, Jesus did something surprising. He invited me to take a new name. One of the women gave me a Bible in Arabic and pointed to a story about a man named Saul, a persecutor who met Jesus and became Paul, an apostle. God often gives new names when he gives new life, she explained. But it is not a rule. It is an invitation. I thought about it for days. My old name, Samira, was tied to royalty, to my father, to a life that had nearly destroyed me. I did not hate it, but I could not carry it without carrying all that history. I wanted a name that reminded me of who I was now, not who they tried to make me. One morning, while reading about the women who followed Jesus, a name stood out: Hannah, Grace. Another, Maria, the mother of Jesus, a woman honored in both Islam and Christianity. And then one more: Noor, Not a biblical name, but Arabic for light. I smiled. What if I am all three? I joked. The women laughed. You can be, one said, but on the paperwork, you get one. In the end, I chose Nur Maria for my everyday documents Nur, because Jesus had pulled me out of darkness, and Maria, because God had chosen a Middle Eastern girl once before to carry his son into the world. But in my heart, Jesus called me something even more precious, simply daughter. A new name did not erase the danger. News reached us that my father had issued a statement declaring that his wayward daughter was dead to the family, that anyone helping me would be considered an enemy. Anonymous messages online promised revenge. Some came from strangers. Some, heartbreakingly, came from cousins. Yet, even as those threats rolled in, God opened another door. A church in another country, far from Saudi Arabia, far from London, offered to sponsor me as a religious asylum seeker. A family volunteered to host me until I could stand on my own feet. To accept meant moving again, starting again, trusting again. I hesitated for only a moment. I had already learned this lesson once. When Jesus opens a door, you step through it, not because you are fearless, but because you trust the one holding it open. Arriving in my new country felt like being dropped into a blank page. No one knew my old titles. No one cared about my father's wealth. The people at the airport saw only what was printed on my documents. A young woman seeking protection because of religious persecution. The family that welcomed me was ordinary by Western standards. A modest house, a second-hand car, a loud dog who barked at the doorbell. For me, their home felt like a palace of a different kind, one built not on fear and control, but on love and mutual respect. They showed me practical things: how to budget, how to apply for language classes, how to cook simple meals. The mother took me to the supermarket and let me choose my own fruit for the first time. I stood there, staring at rows of apples and oranges, overwhelmed by the simple freedom of picking one without asking permission. In the evenings, we read the Bible together. I learned about the early church believers who risked everything to follow Jesus, who were hunted by religious and political leaders, who met in homes and catacombs, whispering hymns in the dark. Their stories felt eerily familiar. I got a job washing dishes in a cafe. At first, the work felt beneath me. I had grown up with servants. Now I was one. But over time, that job became sacred to me. Each plate I cleaned was a small act of honest labor. No manipulation, no politics, no bloodline. Just work exchanged for pay. Dignity earned by effort, not birth. Sometimes, while wiping tables, I would think of the palace's marble halls and laugh softly at the contrast. I had traded gold for soap and water, and I was happier scrubbing saucepans than I had ever been walking down those endless, silent corridors. Of course, not everything was easy. I struggled with guilt. Was I a betrayer for leaving my family? Was I ungrateful for rejecting the religion of my childhood? Would God punish me for the grief my mother surely felt? Each time, Jesus met my guilt with truth, that he himself had said following him might mean leaving fathers and mothers, that he had come not to enforce abusive peace, but to bring a sword that cut through lies. He reminded me that he had not rescued me so I could live forever under the shadow of what if. He had rescued me so I could heal, grow, and one day help others. Slowly, my grief began to transform into something else. Purpose. The first time I shared my story publicly, my hands trembled. A pastor's wife invited me to speak at a small women's gathering, nothing fancy, just 20 or 30 women sitting on folding chairs in a church hall. I stood there, microphone in hand, staring at faces that looked nothing like the women I had grown up with. Different skin tones, different languages, different cultures. Yet, the pain in their eyes, when I began to speak, was instantly recognizable. I told them about my golden prison, my father's announcement, my forced engagement to my younger brother. I told them about the dreams, about Jesus standing at the altar with me, about the wedding night that never happened. The escape in London, the new family, the new name. I expected them to look at me with pity or horror. Instead, many of them began to cry, not for me alone, but for their own stories. Afterward, they came up to me, one by one. A woman from Eastern Europe whispered, "My husband used religion to control me too." A woman from Latin America said, "My father chose a man for me. I thought I had no choice." A former Muslim from North Africa held my hand and said, "I met Jesus in dreams as well. I thought I was crazy. Now I know I am not alone." In that moment, I understood something deep. My story was not just about me. It was a door for others. The thing that had nearly destroyed me, the forced marriage, the betrayal, the loss became the very thing God used to reach people trapped in their own prisons. My testimony did not glorify my pain. It glorified the one who had stepped into it. Jesus had not only set me free, he was now using my freedom to pull others toward the light. I started receiving emails and messages from women in closed countries. Some wrote in Arabic, some in broken English. "I saw a man in white too," one said. "He called me by name. I am afraid." Another wrote, "My family is forcing me into a marriage. Can your Jesus help me?" Another simply wrote, "I thought God hated me until I heard you speak." I answered carefully, knowing the risks they carried. I could not always provide a physical escape the way others had for me, but I could offer something no one could take from them. The truth that Jesus sees, knows, and loves them right where they are. My pain had become a bridge, and the more I walked across it with others, the more I realized that this far more than being called Your Highness was what I had been created for. Baptism, in my new community, was not just a tradition, it was a declaration. For me, it was also a line I could never uncross. The church scheduled it for a warm summer afternoon. The small sanctuary was filled with people from many nations. Some had never met a Saudi in their lives. Others were former Muslims themselves, eyes bright with understanding. I wore a simple white dress, nothing like the extravagant gown from my wedding day. No pearls, no diamonds, no gold, just cotton, water, and the presence of the God who had followed me through palaces and plains and hidden stairwells. Before I stepped into the baptismal pool, the pastor asked if I wanted to share anything. My voice shook, but my heart was steady. "My whole life," I said, "I was told that God's love had to be earned by obedience and sacrifice. I was told that my suffering did not matter as long as it protected my family's honor. I was told that my value was decided by men and sealed by culture." I swallowed. Faces blurred through my tears. "But when I was at my lowest," I continued, "when I was forced to marry my younger brother in the name of religion, someone else came to me. He did not demand more submission. He did not ask for more performance. He called me daughter. His name is Jesus. He is not the God of my father's fear, but the God of perfect love. Today, I die to the old lies and rise with him." The pastor smiled gently. "Do you confess Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior?" he asked. "I do," I said. No doubt, no hesitation. He lowered me into the water. As it closed over my face, images flashed through my mind. The palace, the study, my father's decree, Omar's ring, the wedding dress, the bridal suite door that never opened, all the weight, all the shame, all the fear. When I came up, gasping, the water streaming down my hair and face felt like years of bondage washing away. The congregation applauded, not out of politeness, but with genuine joy. Somewhere, in a palace far away, my father might have been plotting ways to erase me from our family history. On earth, my name was being crossed out of one book. In heaven, Jesus was writing it, in another. Life with Jesus did not become easy after my baptism, but it became honest. I still had nightmares sometimes. I still woke up in a cold sweat at the memory of my father's voice, my brother's eyes, the walls of the palace closing in. I still flinched when I saw men in traditional Saudi clothing on the street, half expecting them to recognize me. But each time fear rose, God met it. Sometimes through scripture, sometimes through the quiet reassurance of the Holy Spirit, sometimes through the unexpected kindness of people who had no idea what I had been through. I began to work more formally with ministries that support women escaping religious abuse and forced marriages. My story opened doors into places where sermons could not go. When I looked into the eyes of a young woman trembling with the decision to stay or leave, I did not see a stranger. I saw myself. "I cannot promise you it will be easy," I would tell her. "I cannot promise you that you will not lose things you love. But I can promise you this: Jesus does not save you halfway. He does not pull you out of Egypt just to leave you in the desert. He leads you all the way to a new land, even if the journey is long." With a LAD 200 over time, God also healed something I did not think could be healed: my view of men. He brought into my life brothers in Christ who treated me as a sister, not an object. Pastors who used their authority to protect, not to control. Eventually, He brought a man who loved Jesus more than he loved himself, a man who listened to my story without flinching, who did not rush my healing, who understood that for me, the word husband carried heavy history. When we married, it was in a small ceremony. No gold, no palace, just a church, a few friends, simple vows, and the presence of the same Jesus who had stood beside me at that other altar years before. This time, when I said "I do," it was not through gritted teeth. It was through tears of gratitude. My husband does not own me. He does not control me. He walks beside me, shoulder to shoulder, as a partner in the mission God has given us, to be a safe place for others who are escaping their own palaces of fear. We now open our home regularly to women who need shelter, to seekers who have seen a man in white in their dreams and do not know what to do next. We pray, we weep, we share meals, we share scripture. Every time I hear a new story, every time I watch the light come on in someone's eyes, when they realize Jesus is not just a prophet but a savior. This is why I survived. If you had seen me on my wedding day in Riyadh, walking down that gold-lined aisle toward my younger brother, you might have thought my story was over. So did I. But the God I now know, the God I met in dreams, the God who spoke my name in the darkest nights, the God who called himself Jesus, had a different ending in mind. I lost almost everything the world values: my title, my wealth, my security, my place in a powerful family. I may never again walk through the palace where I grew up. My father may go to his grave insisting that I am dead. My mother might never hear my voice on the phone. Those are real losses, and I do not minimize them. Yet, in losing those things, I gained something infinitely greater. I discovered that my worth does not depend on a last name, a bloodline, or a culture. It does not depend on what men think I am worth, or what religion says my role should be. My worth is measured by the price Jesus paid for me. The same Jesus who sat with me in my room when I thought I was alone now walks with me every day. The same Jesus who stopped the consummation of my forced marriage now sanctifies my real one. The same Jesus who opened a door in a London department store now opens doors for my testimony in places I never imagined. I am no longer just a former Saudi princess. I am a daughter of the King of Kings. If you are listening to my story, wherever you are behind palace walls, in a small apartment, in a refugee camp, in a comfortable house with invisible chains around your heart, I want you to hear this. God sees you. Not the version of you that your family demands, not the one your culture defines, not the one your fear has shaped, the real you. Beneath all of that, He sees every tear on your pillow. He hears every prayer you are too afraid to speak out loud. He knows the secret shame, the hidden abuse, the confusion about a God who seems to ask for your pain as proof of your loyalty. I am not asking you to hate your background. I am not asking you to abandon your culture. I am inviting you to ask a dangerous question. What if Jesus is more than I've been told? What if His love is real enough to change my story too? You may not be forced to marry your younger brother. Your prison may look different. Addiction, fear, control, lies. But the same Jesus who met me in mine stands outside yours as well. knocking gently, patiently, persistently. He will not force the door open, but if you, even in a whisper, ask him to come in, he will. My name was Princess Samira bint Faisal al-Hadi. Now my name is Noor Maria in this world, and simply daughter in his mouth. I was once a prisoner in a palace. Now I am free in Christ. And the same Jesus who saved me from a marriage that should never have happened is ready to save you from whatever threatens to crush your soul if you are willing to let him. That is my testimony. That is why I will praise him for the rest of my life.